Hey everyone, and welcome back. If you're new here, thank you for stopping by. Before we get into today's story, which is a heavy one, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below when you're done. Your support means the world to me. Now, let's get into it. When I was 8 years old, my brother Julian pushed me down the flight of stairs that connected our living room to the bedrooms upstairs. It wasn't a playful shove. It was a deliberate, hard push between my shoulder blades that sent me tumbling end over end. I remember the sickening crunch when my left hand twisted backward beneath me, trying to break the fall. The pain was a white-hot explosion that shot up my arm, making me see stars. He cried when our parents burst into the room, his face a perfect mask of horror and regret. He sobbed that it was a terrible accident, that we were just playing tag and I'd tripped. I, still reeling from the shock and the agony, was the one who was grounded for a week for starting it, for running in the house. That's how things always were in our house. Julian was the artist of chaos, and I was the designated cleanup crew, or more often, the collateral damage punished for his masterpieces. He was the golden boy, armed with a smile that could disarm a battalion and lies so clever they sounded more truthful than reality. A halo of perfect innocence seemed to hover over his blonde hair, an illusion no one in our family ever dared to question. I, on the other hand, was the storm cloud, the one who made things tense, the one who was too serious. He got away with everything. Skipping school for a week was just him being adventurous. Stealing money from our dad's wallet was chalked up to him not understanding its value. The blatant disrespect he showed our mom was just him testing boundaries, a normal part of being a boy. My transgressions were of a different nature. I was given long, weary lectures for being too emotional, for being too sensitive, for simply being too much. If I cried out of frustration or hurt, I was accused of manufacturing a scene to get attention. If I dared to stand up for myself, to point out the blatant injustice of our household, I was swiftly labeled the reason our home never felt peaceful. I was the source of all conflict, the difficult child. By the time I was 13, I had mastered the art of silence. My mouth became a sealed vault where my real thoughts went to die. My bedroom transformed from a simple place to sleep into a fortified shelter. The door was always locked, my headphones a permanent fixture, blasting music to drown out the sound of my family living a life I wasn't truly a part of. Homework became my only welcome distraction, a world of solvable problems and clear-cut answers. Julian, of course, had no respect for my sanctuary. He'd barge in whenever he pleased, the lock a minor inconvenience he'd pick with a paperclip. He'd take whatever he liked, a book, my new headphones, the few dollars I'd saved, and laugh at the rest, at the posters on my wall, at the quiet order of my desk. My parents, if they were even around, would barely look up from the television, their silence a form of passive consent. Birthdays were a perfect summary of our dynamic. I would receive gift cards to stores I didn't shop at, and be subjected to awkward, pat-on-the-back hugs that lasted a fraction of a second. Julian got parties. Loud, boisterous affairs that filled the house with noise, laughter, and attention, all of it revolving around him. Every year that passed, I felt myself shrink a little more, my inner world contracting until I was just a ghost haunting the hallways of my own home. On the morning of my 17th birthday, I made a decision. I packed everything I truly owned into 2 worn-out duffel bags and left without a plan, without a destination. I was simply done. Done pretending that sterile, tense house was a home. Done waiting for someone to see me. No one chased after me. No one called to see if I was safe. My phone remained silent for days, then weeks. It was as if my disappearance was not a crisis but a relief, a quiet expectation finally fulfilled. They had been waiting for me to solve my own problem by vanishing. The following years were a blur of scraping by. I learned the topography of friends, couches, and the rhythms of part-time jobs that paid just enough to keep me from starving. I learned to live with very little, to find comfort in the silence that once suffocated me. It wasn't freedom, not the glorious, cinematic version you see in movies, but it was something adjacent to it. It was the absence of being watched, judged, and dismissed. Years later, when the world collectively fell apart during the pandemic, and I had nowhere left to go, I made the colossal mistake of calling them. The hotel where I worked as a front desk clerk had closed its doors unceremoniously. There was no meeting, no heartfelt goodbye, just a group email and a final paycheck that was a cruel joke. I had 3 weeks to figure out where to live. My roommate, who had a safety net I could only dream of, packed her bags and was gone within days, headed back to her parents' sprawling home in the suburbs. I didn't have that option. I sold what little furniture I had, donated my clothes, and used the last of my meager savings to buy a battered, second-hand camper shell for my old pickup truck. It was ugly, with a persistent leak in the corner that made everything smell like wet cardboard, but it was mine. With my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, I called my mom. I asked, my voice small, if I could just park in their driveway for a few weeks, just until I got back on my feet. Her hesitation was a physical thing I could feel through the phone line. "Oh, honey, that's tough," she'd said. "It's just, we have so much going on right now. Julian and Mira moved back in, you see, and the house is just bursting at the seams." A day later, a text from Mira lit up my phone screen. "Hope the truck bed's cozy. I found a sprawling grocery store parking lot that was open 24/7 and seemed to have a lax policy on towing. I learned the grim art of stretching meals from a small cooler and a stockpile of cheap instant food. I became a ghost, running an extension cord from unsecured church outlets in the dead of night to charge my phone and power a small reading light. The 24-hour gym became my bathroom, a place for hot showers that felt like the peak of luxury. It was the absolute lowest point of my life. But in that crushing, lonely quiet, a strange thing happened. I learned how to live without asking for permission. I learned precisely what I needed versus what I wanted. I learned what I could endure. I learned to sleep through the wail of police sirens and wake up without the familiar knot of fear in my stomach. I didn't know it yet, but that leaky camper, the one they mocked, was the first thing in my entire life that I had ever truly owned. It was my lifeboat. The job came through a friend of a friend, a lifeline thrown when I was about to go under. It was at a massive shipping warehouse in the next city over. The work was anything but glamorous, just an endless parade of boxes, the roar of forklifts, brutally early shifts, and mind-numbing late nights. But it paid more than minimum wage, and they didn't ask for my life story. The manager, a tall, wiry man named Ron with sun-creased skin and a gravelly smoker's laugh, glanced once at the camper perched on the back of my truck in the parking lot and just nodded. A silent understanding passed between us. I found a spot to park near the rear fence, a forgotten corner of the lot where no one bothered to look twice. Nobody said a single word about my living situation, as long as I showed up on time and didn't complain. The routine became my salvation. My day started before the sun, the cold air a sharp slap to the face. I'd slip on my work gloves, load pallets, and keep my head down. In the warehouse, I was anonymous. No one cared who I was or where I slept. They cared if I showed up. They cared if I pulled my weight. And I did. I pulled my weight and then some. I grabbed every hour of overtime I could, worked every weekend shift no one else wanted. I didn't have anywhere better to be, and the physical exhaustion kept my mind from drifting into dark, familiar waters. When the first frost of winter arrived, Ron, without me asking, let me run a heavy-duty extension cord from the side of the building so I could plug in a small electric heater. I told him I'd work Sundays for free to pay for the power. He just waved a dismissive hand, but I worked those Sundays anyway. Little by little, dollar by dollar, I built a life. Savings account started to grow. I bought new tires for the truck. I tore out the old, moldy insulation in the camper and replaced it, meticulously sealing every seam. I got a proper gym membership, a luxury just for the unlimited hot showers. On my rare days off, I'd sit inside my small, warm camper, a hot drink cradled in my hands, listening to the rain drumming on the fiberglass roof. For the first time, I felt something that resembled safety. It wasn't just shelter anymore. It was mine. I kept my world deliberately small. I made no calls to my family. I posted no updates on social media. I effectively ceased to exist for them, and I stopped caring if anyone in that old life knew I existed at all. That silence, which had once felt like a punishment, had transformed into my most cherished freedom. Months bled into a year, each day a quiet, disciplined march forward. Then, one afternoon, after a long shift, I was walking back to my truck and found myself staring at a listing taped to the break room wall. It was for a house. Small, close to work, and with a price that seemed almost possible. I almost didn't take the number. My mind screamed that it was foolish, that it was beyond my reach. but my hand moved before I could stop it, pulling the small paper tab from the bottom of the flyer. The house wasn't anything fancy. It was a 3-bedroom manufactured home with faded gray siding and a front step that sagged a little on one side. But it had plumbing, a real roof. It had walls that would be mine. I drained nearly every single dollar I had saved into the down payment. After signing the final papers, I sat in the parking lot of the loan office and cried. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but something closer to pure exhaustion, profound relief, and utter disbelief. I didn't tell a soul for days. I would just drive past the house in the evenings after work, watching it sit quietly beneath the pale yellow glow of its porch light, as if it were patiently waiting for me to come home. When I finally moved in, I slept on the floor the first night, wrapped in 2 blankets with a small space heater buzzing faithfully beside me. It was the deepest, most peaceful sleep I'd had in years. The next day, I parked my truck in the backyard and carefully lowered the camper off the bed. I cleaned it from top to bottom, covered it with a heavy tarp, and left it tucked away near the back fence, a quiet, stoic monument to how far I'd come. A week later, on a sudden impulse, I posted a single photo on Facebook. It was just the porch light illuminating the house number. The caption was simple, "Built this life from the back of a truck." I didn't expect anything. I got a few likes, a kind message from an old coworker. Then, silence. 3 weeks after that, they showed up. Julian and Mira, my mother and my father, all of them standing on my new porch as if they were arriving at a pre-planned family reunion. I had never given them my address. They had never asked if they could come. I opened the door, stunned into silence, and they all pushed past me before I could form a word. They wandered through the rooms like tourists in a model home, their entitlement a suffocating presence. Mira whispered something in Julian's ear and giggled. My mother nodded approvingly, a small, tight smile on her face. "You've got a lot of space for just one person," she said, running her manicured fingers along my hallway wall as if testing its quality. My father stood in the kitchen, his eyes scanning the layout, and I could practically see him mentally rearranging my cabinets. I didn't say much, just followed them from room to room, my heart pounding a frantic drum against my ribs, my mouth desert dry. It was like watching a slow, deliberate invasion. When they finally decided to leave, Julian lingered by the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Let's talk soon," he said, his tone casual, conspiratorial. "I've got something I think you'll want to hear." Julian came by the next afternoon, alone this time. He arrived with a large to-go cup of coffee in his hand and that same casual confidence he'd always worn like a custom-fit jacket. He didn't knock, just tapped once on the glass and let himself in, as if it were still our childhood home and I was just a guest borrowing the space. "I've been thinking," he started, settling into one of my kitchen chairs like it belonged to him. "This place, it just makes sense for us. It's closer to my new job, and it's in a much better school district. You've got the extra rooms." He took a long sip of his coffee and smiled, a magnanimous, benevolent smile, as if he just offered me a winning lottery ticket. "Oh, by the way," he added, "Mira's pregnant again. So yeah, we could really use the space." I just stared at him, my mind a blank slate, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You'd still be here, obviously," he continued, waving his hand dismissively, as if this had all been pre-approved by some higher authority. "But we'd need the master bedroom for the baby. You could take the smaller room at the back, or honestly, you could just move back into the camper for a while. You were comfortable in there before, right?" I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He leaned back in my chair, tapping his fingers on my table. There'd have to be some structure, of course. Quiet hours, obviously. No guests without clearing it with us first. We'd split groceries, but Mira does all the cooking, so that's really a win for you when you think about it. That was when something inside me, some tightly wound spring I'd been compressing for 2 decades, finally snapped. It wasn't violent. It wasn't theatrical. It was a quiet, clean break. I stood up, placed my palms flat on the table, and for the first time I looked my brother directly in the face, seeing him not as my tormentor, but as just a man. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the entire room. He blinked, his confident smirk faltering. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no. You're not moving in. You're not rearranging my house. You are not making rules in my home, and I am absolutely not sleeping in a camper so you and Mira can play house in something you didn't earn. Celeste, be reasonable." "I have been reasonable my entire life," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I was reasonable when Mom and Dad let you lie about shattering my hand. I was reasonable when you borrowed my college fund for that ridiculous business idea that vanished overnight. I was even reasonable when you all left me living behind a warehouse and didn't care enough to even ask if I was dead or alive. He opened his mouth to argue, to deploy that old, familiar charm, but I didn't let him. This is my house. Mine. You don't get to come in here and take it. Get out. Julian left without finishing his coffee. And for the first time in my entire life, the silence that followed his departure felt like something I had chosen. It felt like power. It was a Thursday afternoon when I pulled into my driveway and knew instantly that something was wrong. My welcome mat was crooked. The porch light, which I never left on during the day, was lit. The blinds in the living room, normally drawn tight for privacy, were wide open. My hand was shaking as I tried my key in the front door. It didn't fit. I tried again, slower this time, jamming it into the lock. Still nothing. My blood ran cold. I walked around to the side of the house and saw it. Julian's truck was parked by the curb, its tailgate down and empty. Inside the house, through the living room window, I saw Mira stacking boxes in my hallway. She moved with an air of ownership, as if she'd lived there her whole life. Julian appeared behind her, holding one of my blankets. They weren't moving in. They had already moved in. I ran to the front door and knocked, my knuckles hitting the wood hard. Once. Twice. Mira turned her head, saw me, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across her face. Julian came to the door, not even bothering to look sheepish. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance, as if I were the one trespassing. "This is my house," I said, my voice a blade of ice. He held up a folded piece of paper, already creased and stained with what looked like coffee. "You signed this rental agreement. You said we could take the place for a while." My name was scribbled at the bottom. The signature looked nothing like my own. "You forged that," I said flatly. Mira came up behind him, her arms crossed over her slightly showing belly. "Don't be so dramatic, Celeste. You practically left the door wide open for us. We just made it official." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Julian's eyes widened in panic, and he tried to block the lens with his hand, but I kept filming. "You're trespassing," I said calmly, my voice steady. "And you broke my lock." Mira lunged forward and slapped the phone from my hand. It clattered to the porch floor, the screen cracking, but it was still recording. I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. I presented my case with a cold, clear logic I didn't know I possessed. I showed them the deed to my house. I showed them the texts from my mother and Mira. I even pulled up the Facebook post with the photo of my house number and the date I moved in. Julian sputtered, trying to push the fake lease at the officers again and again. Mira launched into a tirade, cursing at the officers and accusing me of abandoning the property. It didn't work. The facts were the facts. They were ordered to leave immediately. The officers stood by, arms crossed, as Julian and Mira dragged their boxes back to their truck in a humiliated silence. Mira muttered threats under her breath the entire time. When the door finally shut behind them, the air inside was still warm and smelled of her perfume. I locked it. Twice. I stood in the empty hallway, my heart racing, feeling as if the walls themselves needed to be reminded who they belonged to. I posted the video that night. I didn't add a caption, just the raw footage of Julian waving that pathetic, forged lease of Mira slapping my phone to the ground, and the clear, unwavering sound of my own voice, calmly and steadily naming exactly what they had done. At first, I thought no one would care, but then the comments started to roll in. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade reached out. An aunt from California messaged me, "Now it all makes sense. I always wondered why you just disappeared. Even people from my work saw it. Good for you," one wrote. "That took real guts." Meanwhile, Mira's social media presence vanished. Julian went completely quiet. My parents missed posting their usual Sunday brunch pictures. The silence on their end was more damning than any confession. Then, one evening, my parents appeared on my porch again. No warning, no apology. "Julian's going through a hard time," my mom began, her voice strained. "This is just making things worse for him." My father added, his jaw tight, "You've proved your point, Celeste. Can't you just let it go now?" For the family, I looked at them, at their tired, pleading faces, and for the first time I didn't flinch. I didn't feel a flicker of the old guilt. "I am doing this for the family," I said, my voice even. "The part of the family that never tried to steal from me." They stood there, speechless. At that exact moment, another car pulled into my driveway. It was my cousin, Naomi, the one who'd messaged me from California. She'd flown in that morning. She stepped out of her rental car and came to stand beside me on the porch without saying a word, a silent, solid presence at my side. That was the last time my parents ever tried to guilt me. That weekend, I made a copy of my house key and gave it to Naomi. A week later, Julian texted me as if nothing had happened. "Hey, can we talk? It's about the kids and rent." I agreed to meet him in the driveway. He showed up alone, hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes darting everywhere but at my face. He told me Mira wasn't working. The kids were growing so fast, and formula and diapers were expensive. They'd just fallen behind on their bills. He didn't ask to move in again. Just asked for money. Even a few hundred a month would help, he said, his voice low and rehearsed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I walked him through my spreadsheet. I showed him the line items for my mortgage, property tax, insurance, and the repairs I'd already had to make. Then I showed him a list of incoming tenants. I had started renting out the small back bedroom and the finished basement studio to 2 women from the warehouse. They were quiet, respectful, and paid on time. I don't have money to spare, I said simply. I didn't buy this house to become a bank for the person who tried to take it from me. Julian didn't argue. He just nodded, his lips pressed into a tight line, and walked back to his truck. A few days after that, Mira did a slow drive-by, screaming obscenities out her window. She called me a thief, a traitor, a cold, barren witch. I stood at my kitchen sink, watched her through the curtain, and didn't move a muscle. The tenants arrived later that day with their suitcases and bags of groceries. One of them, a woman named Maria, had baked a loaf of banana bread and brought me a thick slice without being asked. The other, Sarah, started watering the small patch of lawn in the front yard before her shift every morning. The house felt different now. It was full but quiet. Lived in but peaceful. That night I went out back, pulled the tarp off the old camper, and aired it out. I didn't know it yet, but I would need it again soon, just not for me. The rumors started as small whispers passed from a coworker who knew a neighbor of Mira's. Then someone forwarded me a screenshot of a message thread that made everything brutally clear. She'd been seeing another man, not recently, for most of her marriage to my brother. Julian, steeped in denial, refused to believe it. He denied it until the truth forced itself into the harsh light of day. The dates didn't add up. The new baby didn't look like him. A paternity test finally put an end to the guessing game. The youngest child wasn't his. When the results came in, something in Julian finally broke completely. Mira did not take the exposure well. She threw things. She screamed at him in front of the kids. When their oldest son, Luca, tried to step between them, she turned on him too. A neighbor called the police. They found her outside, barefoot and shaking, yelling nonsense into the night. She was taken in for a psychiatric evaluation. Julian was left standing alone in the driveway, holding his son's hand. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The divorce was swift and brutal. Mira disappeared, supposedly to live with family in Arizona. She didn't take the kids. Julian and his son moved back into our parents' house, into the noise and the judgment. I heard he barely spoke. My parents stopped showing their faces at church. The golden boy had tarnished, and there were no more excuses left to polish him with, no more bragging about his successes. I sat on my porch that evening, a warm drink in my hand, listening to the gentle hum of my peaceful neighborhood. I wasn't happy. I wasn't angry. I was just still. I was just done. And then, a few days later, Julian returned to my doorstep. Only this time, he wasn't asking for the house. He didn't knock this time. He just stood at the bottom of my porch steps, hands buried in his pockets, his eyes heavy with a weariness that seemed ancient. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He didn't ask to be invited. I'm not here to ask for the house, he said, his voice quiet. I know better. I waited. It's for Luca, he added, his voice cracking slightly. He's not sleeping well at Mom and Dad's. It's too much noise, too many people. He asked if we could live somewhere quieter. He misses having his own space. I looked past him, to where the old camper sat beneath the oak tree, clean and unused. I thought of all the cold nights I had spent in there, shivering with a single blanket pulled up to my chin, pretending the thin fiberglass walls made me safe. I thought of how that tiny, cramped space had taught me how to survive when no one else would help me. I'm not giving it to you, I said. I'm not asking you to, he replied, looking up at me for the first time. I stepped off the porch and led him to the backyard. I told him he and Luca could park the camper behind the house where I could keep an eye on things. I told him there would be rules, no loud visitors, no Mira ever, no overnight stays from anyone he couldn't introduce to me face to face. I wrote it all down on a piece of paper, a contract between us, and made him sign it. I recorded us shaking hands on my phone. Julian didn't argue. He just nodded, his voice low. Thank you, Celeste. Really? I didn't say you're welcome. I just handed him the spare keys to the camper lock and walked back inside my house. He moved in that evening. By the next morning, I heard the soft, rhythmic thump of a small soccer ball against the grass in the backyard. One night, long after Luca had fallen asleep, I heard a muffled sound coming from the camper. I walked outside, expecting to find something broken or spilled. Instead, I found Julian sitting on the camper floor, his shoulders shaking, his hands covering his face. "I ruined everything," he whispered, not to me but to the empty space around him. "I let her ruin us and I let them ruin you." I didn't interrupt. I didn't touch him. I didn't offer a single word of comfort. I just let him speak until the silence stretched between us, a chasm we both knew we would never fully cross. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he finally said, his voice raw. "I just wanted you to know that I see it now, all of it." I nodded once, then turned and left him there to sit with his grief. The days passed slowly, peacefully. Lucas spent more and more time in my yard. He helped my tenant, Sarah, water the garden. He drew elaborate chalk pictures on my driveway. He'd bring me dandelions he picked from the lawn, presenting them like a precious bouquet. He never asked questions. He just seemed content to be in a quiet space. My parents came by one Sunday afternoon. They brought groceries. There was no grand speech, no dramatic defense. They just stood in my kitchen with quiet eyes and a tired, defeated look I'd never seen on them before. "We were wrong," my mother said, her voice barely a whisper, "about everything. You didn't deserve any of it." For the first time in their lives, they didn't ask for anything in return. And so this is my life now. It's quiet. It's peaceful. It's mine. The house is full, but with people who respect its walls. The silence is a choice, not a punishment. And the camper still sits in the backyard, a reminder not of what I lost, but of what I was forced to build, myself. Thank you all for listening. It's not an easy story to tell, but it's mine. Please, if you feel moved to, leave a comment below. Your words and your community here have been a light in some very dark times. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.